section.
Yep.
Antonio could go first.
I thought
Yeah,
that
yeah, he
would
mentioned that to
be
me
the
also.
secretary.
He'll give the overview and then I get it.
Perfect. And then on the, we're going to do, they asked me to switch from sort of open Q&A. You all have to.
Oh.
you may
Very
open
interesting.
your mics, all right? So
I
I'm
went to
going to do
India
one.
with, is this
Okay,
mine?
so
Can I
basically,
stand?
It can be.
Antonio first about sort of the metrics.
I went
how
to
do
India
we
with
make
Secretary.
successful? And then I'm asking you, and that'll be
Great.
also ask you
Certainly isn't the lap
about
of
teaching,
luxury enough.
how that fits in with HMID, basically. Is this, I mean, the way I'm going to frame it is this the erosion of NAFTA, or is this us gaining something? So how do you make sure we can have it simply? Yeah? Very good.
We're just trying to round up our final speaker here for the panel, and then Jane Harmon, president of the Wilson Center, will be in to make welcoming remarks in just one moment.
Acabando documentos, yo también me agarré la innovación.
So please take your seats. We're about to get started here.
Okay. Well, apologies, everyone. I was standing in the hall doing deals, which I guess is what we all want to do. And I'm really delighted to introduce this panel. I'm Jane Harmon, President and CEO of the Wilson Center, recovering politician, happily recovering politician, 9 terms in Congress. Have been here for just exactly 4 years and am thrilled out of my mind by the quality of work that we do here. Want to welcome our panelists. This is the A-list. Stefan Seelig, my new best friend, came down from New York. We are in the closest contact with the Department of Commerce just across the street and are planning to do many, many things together. Undersecretary of State, Catherine Novelli, there she is, and I have to do a shout out to my oldest buddy, Caroline Croft over there, who does wonderful work. From the Mexican Embassy, Antonio Ortiz Mena and Ken Smith. And then we have others. We have Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security. Is he here?
He's not in the room, but he's...
Well, in theory, coming. At least he will be paid for the next 8 months. Jose Raul Perales, Assistant Secretary of Transportation. Susan Kurland, Administrator of U.S. Energy Information Administration. Adam Szyminski. Is he here?
Yes.
Oh, perfect timing. There you are. Acting Secretary of the Interior, Lori Faith. Is she here? Yeah, perfect. So this actually worked. Let me just make a couple of introductory remarks, half of which I've already made. About this panel, about you, and about the Wilson Center. Having watched Congress descend into toxic partisanship. Oh, what happened to Jim Jones? Is he still here? He was at breakfast. But former ambassador to Mexico, dear friend, former law colleague Jim Jones was here, maybe still is here. Having watched Congress descend into very toxic partisanship these last few years, it's good to be reminded that parts of Washington, including the agencies and friends assembled here, still work. And that includes, P.S., a certain federal trust instrument called the Wilson Center. It is really amazing to see our convening power, not my convening power, our convening power, and the ways in which we can keep civil dialogue backed by deep scholarship and thought going in a town where there's almost none of it about a mile from here. I was in Mexico City last fall with Duncan. Is Duncan here? Duncan Wood? He's hard to miss. Where is he? Hiding out. Andrew Seeley's here, the founder and first father of our Mexico Institute. But I was in Mexico City last fall with Duncan and Chris Wilson, right here. And while there, met with the foreign minister, Jose Antonio Meade. That's your boss, Antonio. I thought I'd point that out. It was extremely, I've made multiple visits, but extremely impressive. Mexico City is part of a country clearly on the move, with major energy reform underway that should help pick up the pace of growth, and many other major economic reforms in progress. People know the drugs and thugs story about Mexico, but not enough of them know the economic story about Mexico, and that's a story we all want to tell. Mexico and the Americas face challenges, especially public security and transnational organized crime, which are still challenges. But the good news is the rise of Mexico's middle class and the creation of an impressive manufacturing platform. Importantly, that platform isn't just Mexican. I think everybody gets the cross-border relationships, Mexico, U.S., Canada, and the U.S.'s top 2 export markets. Again, you all know that, but 5 people outside this room know that, and that's about why we need to tell this story so much better. Today's conversation matters to everyone, not just to Mexico experts, but obviously to manufacturers and employers and employed and unemployed citizens of the United States. We trade so much with Mexico and have such deep supply chain links that we could conceivably be called a vertically and horizontally integrated business enterprise. Competition is fierce in the global economy, but Mexico is our partner, and the goal is to make the North America platform more powerful and effective in the global economy. Just a few weeks ago, the Wilson Center, actually the Mexico Institute, launched a new report, the U.S. Mexico Border Economy in Transition, which provides a set of recommendations to keep our partnership competitive with the rest of the world. That report is just one example of the great work of the Mexico Institute, and another example of the way we pride ourselves in seeing around corners. 5 or 6 years ago, while most people were just focused on drugs and thugs, the Mexico Institute began to ramp up its work on economic competitiveness. And so, when Presidents Obama and Peña Nieto decided to raise economic issues to the top of the bilateral agenda, we were ready to step forward with policy ideas. So, in conclusion, we now have major projects on trade, border management, innovation, education, and as today's event testifies, these are the topics now being discussed at the highest levels on the policy agenda. So with that, you should all know that Chris Wilson may look young, but he's actually really old and really accomplished on this set of issues, and it's my pleasure to welcome a geriatric member of the Wilson Center, Chris Wilson.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction. Thank you. We have 2 fantastic panels today. We're going to move right into the first one. I'm going to speak as little as possible so that you can hear from the wonderful officials that we have from both the U.S. and Mexican governments on really what's happening with the high-level economic dialogue, and there is a lot happening with the high-level economic dialogue, as you will find out right now. So let me just make 2-second introductions. You have bios in your materials, but we're very happy to have with us Stefan Seelig, Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade. He's been in this position for, I think, about a year now. I first met you in El Paso, actually, on the border.
9 months, but who's counting?
9 months. But actually has a very long trajectory in the private sector, and that's one of the things that he brings to this relationship and what we've been trying to do already today in terms of reaching out, having connections between private sector and government as we're working on U.S. Mexico economic issues and competitiveness. Also, Catherine Novelli, Undersecretary of the Department of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment. She also has a very interesting background, having worked at Apple, I think, previously in the private sector. Also worked in the USTR, the trade representative, working on Europe and the Middle East. But also has this, interesting background mix, and that's something we see across the panel here. So thank you very much for coming today. Ken Smith Ramos, who runs the NAFTA and Trade Office, the Ministry of Economy for Mexico at the embassy here in Washington. Ken has a background in agriculture as well as competition issues in Mexico, having worked in different agencies. Thanks very much for being here today, Ken. And last but certainly not least, Antonio Ortiz Mena, longtime friend of ours in the Mexico Institute, has been here in Washington running the economic affairs section of the embassy in Mexico, the Mexican embassy here for years. Was actually one of the people who helped with the negotiations of NAFTA, so has been doing this for as long as any of us, and is also a former professor at CIDE. So thank you also for joining us. I'm going to turn to you first, Undersecretary, so take it away.
Thank you, Chris. It is always a pleasure to be here at the Wilson Center. As I said this morning, I was for the first time able to navigate my way through the Ronald Reagan building to get here, so I'm really feeling like an old hand. But I do want to thank you and all of your colleagues for what you do to working with the private sector and working with all of us in the U.S. government to advance and optimize the U.S. Mexican bilateral relationship. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. So I wanted to start my remarks today by pointing out that this past annual HLED meeting coincided with a milestone for Mexico. 20 years ago, Mexico was in the midst of a currency crisis, a banking crisis, and a severe recession that brought their economy to the brink of collapse. And that led President Clinton 20 years ago to loan $20 billion to assist the Mexican economy. And during an exchange with reporters in early 1995, he was asked to address the criticism that this commitment was Wall Street led. And the president responded at the time that helping the Mexican economy is more important to American workers and Main Street businesses than it was, in fact, to big corporations. So now, roll the clock forward 20 years later, I think it is absolutely clear that Mexico's importance to the U.S. economy today has grown much deeper, much more dynamic, and is in fact essential. Mexico, as many of you know, is our second largest export market and our third largest trading partner overall. Total goods and services traded between our countries regularly exceed over $500 billion a year. And more than a million American jobs are supported by our exports to Mexico. And so if we are talking about energy security, border security, or North American competitiveness, clearly Mexico has become and will remain an irreplaceable partner. So in less than one generation, our relationship has gone from mutual economic dependency to a true strategic partnership, and that partnership is clearly reflected in the high-level economic dialogue and what came out of our annual meeting this year on January 6th. The most important deliverable was the 6 strategic priorities that we agreed would drive our workflow for 2015. Energy, modern borders, workforce development, regulatory cooperation, regional and global leadership, and stakeholder engagement. And Undersecretary Novelli will discuss some of these priorities in some more detail in a few moments with you. So when you look at these priorities as a whole, they represent so much more than just the convergence of our interest. They represent, in fact, the convergence of our business and economic values. Regional competitiveness, energy sustainability, accountable government, cultivating human capital, sound and secure regulation, and an open environment for private sector investment. And all this is essential, of course, because if we are going to deepen the strategic partnership between our countries, then relying on the convergence of our markets will simply not be enough. What we, of course, need is also the convergence of our values. Henry Kissinger, who I met for the first time 2 weeks ago, famously said that America does not have permanent friends or enemies, only interests. But the fact is we also have shared enduring values, and whether it is the Transatlantic Alliance, whether it is the Bretton Woods Economic Order, or our North American Alliance, we have seen the binding power of our shared values, and we have seen how those shared values can provide the basis for an enduring strategic relationship, and I am more than confident that this is what we are witnessing here with Mexico and the United States. The success of the HLED and the bilateral relationship reflects why trade promotion legislation and TPP are so essential to the President's current agenda. Trade promotion legislation and TPP are, I believe, the best tools to help ensure that what binds this relationship and our relationship in the Asia-Pacific are indeed 21st century values. Intellectual property and environmental protections, fair wages, human capital development, and high-performance workplaces. Trade promotion legislation will empower Congress to ensure that these very values drive our negotiations going forward. And a successfully negotiated TPP will lock those values in. The end result is the values convergence that will enhance our strategic relations in the region, and that is why both the United States and Mexico will work under the HLED to bring TPP to fruition. So I would like to close before I hand it off to Kathy by saying that the shared values that bind our two nations is, of course, nothing new. President Clinton, during that same exchange with reporters 20 years ago, added that a major reason for the loan commitment was because, and I quote, "We're trying to promote countries that are moving towards market reforms and moving towards democracy and not undermine them." So clearly supporting our deeply shared values was just as important as was supporting our workers and businesses. The $20 billion, as we all happily know, was repaid in remarkably short order by the Mexican government. Yes. And what remained after that loan was the strengthening of the very shared values that I just talked about. Those very same values that put Mexico on the path to becoming a top 5 global economy by 2050. The values that define the high-level economic dialogue between our countries, and the values that define this enduring partnership. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to having a dialogue with you after these remarks.
Thank you very much. Undersecretary Novelli.
Sure, thanks. And I really want to compliment the work that Stefan's done so far and the work that the Wilson Center's done and how much we appreciate it. We appreciate that convening power. We appreciate the actual detailed practical work that's being done too, because that is what helps inform us, as well as talking to you and hearing from you about what we should be doing and what our agenda should be to bring this relationship forward. And just keying off of something that Stefan said about the Trade Promotion Authority, one of the things that I think is really evident from our relationship with Mexico and what is happening here is that the foundation of this in terms of the economics is really the NAFTA. And we can see what's happened in a very positive way to the U.S. economy, for U.S. workers, for U.S. farmers, and for U.S. companies. And Wilson Center did a great study that Jane was talking about, and there's an amazing statistic in there that talks about 40% of the value of U.S. imports from Mexico. So things coming in from Mexico, 40% of that value is actually made of content produced in the U.S. And so you can't have a better integration than that. And if you compare that to China, where it's only 4%, or even Canada, which is only 25%, I think that really speaks volumes about the power of NAFTA and what's happened as a result of it. And that also speaks volumes about why it is very important that we continue on in having a robust engagement on trade policy and a robust engagement together with Mexico for the TPP, which is only going to help all of us be more competitive in this hyper-competitive atmosphere. So now, what we want to do is build on our success from NAFTA and take it deeper. So we have those principles in place, but what do we do from a practical perspective, and what should the agenda be? And Stefan's outlined sort of the key areas, and what we want to do is make those very granular so that they have an impact on a day-to-day basis on what is happening for our citizens and for our people. And so I just thought I could highlight a couple things. One is energy, which is a new area for us to talk about. We had not sort of had that on our list before. We put it on our list this year. Obviously, the U.S. is in a different position with all of our shale gas exports. Mexico has now sort of outlined its reforms, and so this really presents a huge opportunity for us for cooperating on regulation, on information sharing, on workforce development and cross-border infrastructure, and even energy-related trade. And so we're going to spend time really digging into that this year and looking forward to that. Also, just to highlight, on the aviation side, we concluded an aviation agreement with Mexico that's going to allow passenger and cargo airlines to fly between any city in Mexico and any city in the U.S. And we're hoping that's going to enter into force hopefully by the beginning of next year or sooner, if possible. We're waiting for some procedural things on the Mexican side to bring that into force, but we think that's going to give us real opportunity on tourism and travel-related issues. The other thing that is very, very important is what we're doing on the kind of workforce development, people-to-people kind of things. And there's a couple things there that I just wanted to highlight. And one of them is the Bilateral Forum on Higher Education, Innovation, and Research, which is called FOBESI. And this is a really interesting program because the idea here is to facilitate educational exchanges, not just from students, but also from professors. And so what can we do there to facilitate that scientific research, more joint work together? And in fact, what happened last year was that we facilitated the travel of almost 27,000 Mexican students and teachers to the U.S. And so we're hoping that we're going to continue to grow that because we think that is absolutely vital, those kind of contacts. Also on the workforce development side, we're focusing on energy, technology, advanced manufacturing, and working very, very closely with the private sector in sort of picking those areas and seeing what we can do. The other important piece of this is the Mosaic, which is the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Council that was set up. And the idea there is that we can connect our innovators and small businesses together. And this was talked about by this morning, actually, by the ambassador, how important our small businesses are to each of our economies. And we want to do what we can to really connect them. And so part of what's been done is to set up sort of an analogous situation to sister cities, setting up sister small business development centers. And so that is, those kind of partnerships are aimed at actually not just learning from each other about how to facilitate small business domestically, but how we can get our small businesses together. And part of that is looking at how do we commercialize new technologies, including with the Mexican National Council of Science and Technology. So there's a whole lot going on bilaterally. And these are just a few things. I know my colleagues are going to touch on even more of the things that are going on. The level of engagement is really remarkable, and it's unlike anything I've seen in my 30 years in trade policy. And I think it's in a new direction that's very exciting because it is so hands-on. In addition to looking bilaterally, we're also cooperating globally, and that is fantastic. So we're working together on the TPP negotiations. We are working on global climate change together, looking forward to our Paris meetings and good commitments there. We are working together on Central America and what we can do there to support that region, and especially with respect to energy and secure access there. So there is a whole lot of work going on multilaterally as well, and I think that's just fitting because, as Stefan said, we do have shared values, we have shared vision, and we want to make North America a strong and competitive region so that we can withstand what is coming at us from lots of other regions. So I'll stop there and pass it on.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think we're actually going to go to Antonio next to do a little bit more of an overview, but basically now we'll hear the Mexican side of this story.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for the invitation for convening this, and it's an honor to share this forum with Undersecretary Selig, Undersecretary Novelli. I completely agree with all that they've said, including the fact that we paid that loan on time.
Prepaid.
That loan. I just want to underscore just how important the HLED is for both governments and for the opportunity to hear from stakeholders. Basically, it is the real deal. It's not just, this bureaucrats getting together and talking things, at 50,000 feet. It is the real deal. It helps agencies within country. Sometimes We have some challenges engaging within country, so it helps us coordinate within country and then between countries. So it serves both purposes. It's not only an international engagement process, it also helps us to align a lot of agencies. Some of the challenges that we face in reducing transaction costs to cross-border trade and investment flows are pretty complex, and you need many agencies involved, or you just won't get anywhere. And that's exactly what we're doing. It's a very frank, it's a very pragmatic dialogue, and we basically need to hear from stakeholders to make sure we're doing the right things. At the January 6th HLED meeting here in DC, I remember that Vice President Biden said that if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. So we really need to hear from stakeholders in terms of where we should focus and how we should focus. First, where do we get the most bang for the buck, to put this in colloquial terms. So again, first of all, just to underscore that this is a real pragmatic decision-making mechanism, and that we need to work very closely with stakeholders to make sure that we have meaningful results. Secondly, the HLED is taking place at the time of profound transformations in the Mexican economy. Chris Wilson has done wonderful work on Mexico-U.S. economic relations and on Mexico's reforms. We implemented a far-reaching energy reform. We also have a telecoms reform, a competition policy reform, a financial services reform. And in order to make the most of these reforms, we have to engage with the U.S. because we have a shared production platform, which was already alluded to by Undersecretary Novelli. And that means that trade and investment have increased radically over the last 20 years, but we're not only trading together, but we're producing together. So the opportunity costs of not engaging with each other in a proactive manner are even higher now than they were 20 years ago. So the potential is larger, but the downside is also larger. So we really need to act and think together. And I would like to highlight a couple of issues where I think there are huge opportunities. First of all, energy has already been mentioned. But we would very much like to hear from stakeholders in terms of where we can engage bilaterally in terms of regulatory cooperation, in terms of cross-border connection of the grid, just where stakeholders think we need to move on the energy front. Secondly, the aviation agreement was mentioned. I think it'll be an absolute game changer. It'll be as big as NAFTA was 20 years ago in terms of setting the rules for international engagement. It involves both passenger and cargo. And given that we have a shared economic space, it will greatly boost the competitiveness of the region. And in that regard, I would like to mention one of my favorite initiatives until HLED, and I have several colleagues from DOT here, and it's the strategic logistics corridor. So I know they hear me mention this time and again, and I'll just mention how we've defined it at the HLED so that stakeholders know what it encompasses and that we get very specific suggestions from them. And we defined a logistics corridor as a set of transportation, infrastructure, and logistics services that generate and facilitate the flow of trade and transport among major economic centers or logistic nodes, and involves different modes of transport, airports, roads, ports, and railways, as well as logistics infrastructure, logistics platforms, containers, storage facilities, distribution center. And the creation and enhancing of logistics corridors have the objectives of increasing connectivity and interoperability among different transportation modes, generating efficient freight passenger movement, facilitating service reliability in terms of predictability, security, and homogeneity along the transportation corridor, reducing travel time and transportation costs, and expanding the supply of logistics service and adding value to the products as they move along the supply chain. Whew! It's a long definition, but this just reflects how complex and all-encompassing strategic logistics corridors are. And I think we really need to focus on enhancing these corridors to make the most out of our shared production platform. And then finally, I want to mention something about the NAD Bank, the North American Development Bank. Also, within the sidelines of the HLED meeting on January 6th, Presidents Obama and Peña Nieto agreed to a NAD Bank capital increase. It still has to be approved by the legislatures, but I think this is very important because NAD Bank is a key actor, not only for border initiatives in terms of environmental project and infrastructure to enhance the competitiveness, but it can play a key role in this whole logistics corridors initiative. So I would just encourage you all to be aware of the importance of NAD Bank for the competitiveness of the region, and the importance of NAD Bank having enough capital to perform its job adequately. So I will leave it at that with this invitation and call. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Last but not least, Ken Smith.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to the Wilson Center for being the leader among U.S. Think tanks in promoting the strategic nature of the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. I want to thank the members of the panel as well. We have a great working relationship with the Department of Commerce and with the State Department, and the HLED is evidence of this. Now, I want to put the context in general in terms of the importance that the HLED has in the context of Mexico's priorities for economic development. And without a doubt, the HLED represents a great opportunity to deepen the integration between our countries, the economic integration, and to build on the foundation that NAFTA created. Through 20 years, we were able to eliminate tariffs completely between our countries, but there are still important obstacles to the transaction costs, to obstacles to doing business between our countries. And so these must be faced in a manner that allows us to increase the competitiveness by reducing the costs of doing business across the board. And that's essentially where we're focusing the efforts. In the end, it's about increasing the competitiveness of North American products so that we can trade more amongst ourselves and more with the rest of the world. So you can see how this strategy would be very attractive for Mexico because of the importance that trade is in our represents in our economic development strategy. Trade amounts to almost 65% of our GDP, and of course the U.S. is our number one trading partner. And one of the advantages here as we dive into the specific elements that are of very attractive for Mexico in the HLED, I will echo what Undersecretary Novelli mentioned regarding the pragmatic nature of the approach here. We're looking at specific initiatives that have a real impact on day-to-day activities and operations that can benefit the private sector. So I'll focus on a couple of these, primarily to start the importance of creating a streamlined border, of maximizing the benefits of trade as established in the NAFTA by modernizing our border on many fronts. On the one hand, of course, building new facilities and modernizing old crossings. We share such a huge border that we need constantly to be upgrading our infrastructure to be able to deal with the 21st century realities of the amount and the nature of the trade that takes place between our countries. So under the HLED, we're promoting initiatives specifically, for example, on the expansion of existing facilities in San Diego, Tijuana border crossing, in Nogales, Mariposa, which is the main border crossing where agricultural products cross between our countries, and upcoming as well, the first bridge, the railway bridge in over 100 years in the Brownsville-Matamoros connection. So these are some specific items that we're working on constantly, in addition to items that we're looking at on the regulatory front between Mexico and the U.S. on customs issues. For example, implementing the mutual recognition arrangement between our respective trusted trader programs between the U.S. and Mexico, linking that to guarantee facilitating trade and as well as taking care of any security concerns, strengthening the security at the border and facilitating trade at the same time. One key element also in Mexico's development strategy is workforce development, and that's a key area within the HLED where we can learn a lot from the experience in the U.S. And as Undersecretary Novelli pointed out, the FOBESI allows for this exchange, both of students but of educators that go back and forth between our countries, helping prepare the skilled workforce that the NAFTA region requires. And in our case, for Mexico, it's very attractive because it allows us to maximize the benefits of the demographic bonus that we have. Through the NAFTA over the last 20 years, we've created a platform for manufacturing and export, and we've taken advantage of having a young population. We must really maximize these benefits now and really prepare this workforce for what is needed in the future. And a great example of that is the cluster of aerospace production that exists in Querétaro, where we've linked research design centers with academic institutions such as our aerospace university and the companies that require engineers to come into that sector in particular. So these are some of the beneficial elements of education and innovation that we see in the HLED. Of course, regulatory cooperation is essential. It's essential to eliminate existing barriers, redundant testing, conformity assessment procedures that in practice create obstacles that sometimes go beyond what a tariff would represent. So these elements we're working on and the High-Level Regulatory Cooperation Council, and we will focus this year specifically on issues having to do with transportation regulations as well as food safety, and of course the key new addition to the HLED priorities, as my colleagues have mentioned, energy. Cooperation on technical regulations, also on workforce development in the energy sector. And finally, one of the key elements that we see in terms of the potential of the HLED is the strengthening of an entrepreneurship cooperation. In Mexico, over 98% of our businesses are small and medium sizes. A large portion of these are micro and small businesses. So it is a priority for the Mexican government to incorporate these micro, small, and medium-sized companies into the domestic market, creating the conditions, the regulatory environment that allows them to be created, to grow, satisfy the needs of the domestic market, and inject themselves into the global economy. So several of the programs that we're implementing, some of them through the Mosaic that was explained, allow these companies to generate the tools and the know-how, on the one hand, to increase their capacity, understand how they can run a business, learn from best practices from the U.S., but at the same time also link them up with existing businesses in the United States so that they can become suppliers of major producers and manufacturers in North America, both in the U.S. and Mexico. And we feel that's a way to push the growth and prosperity of SMEs in our region. And finally, Antonio touched upon the key elements of stakeholder outreach. I mean, this is essential because we believe that the success or failure of the HLED will be based on how we are able to interact with civil society and with the productive sectors that can guide our efforts and can tell us specifically what it is that they need in terms of changes in public policy, changes in regulation that can make their operations more efficient. I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ken. So basically, I mean, you guys had to lay out this incredibly complex and vast agenda, and we actually planned to have a little bit of a discussion on this, but because it's such a complex and vast agenda, we've gave you too little time to actually lay out the totality of it. So let me just make a comment about that, and then we can move on to jump into some questions with our next panel, actually. But what this is representative of is just the complexity of the U.S. Mexico relationship. I mean, the U.S. Mexico relationship is, it's the term that's often used is intermestic. There's, it's a combination of international relations and domestic policy. And that's why we have so many agencies represented. We have so many initiatives there. We have this relationship in terms of trade that's become so large that it has to involve all of these different agencies. So they're at the embassies, they're working together day in and day out to move things forward. But because we have such complexity, things won't move forward if we don't have leadership. Because if you're coordinating across so many agencies and really multiple levels of government, because state and local actors, especially in the border region, play a huge role as well, things just don't move forward if things stay at a working group level, if they don't receive real leadership. And I think that's what the HLAD, one thing it really brings to the table and allows us to move forward with, is because we have people like Vice President Biden, we have the secretaries of all the agencies that you and the rest of our panelists represent, we have undersecretaries with us here today, we have people at the real leadership level working on these issues day in and day out, and that's what it's going to take to move the ball forward. So thanks to all of you for your comments, and we're just going to move right into the next session so we can actually dig more into the depth of what's happening in the HLAD. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And we're going to move straight into our next panel so we can have the next group come right on up.
Well, you made
Now we're
noise
even.
today.
Now we're even.
It was great. I loved your remarks.
Good to see you. I'm not talking bilateral. I'm trilateral. No, you need to listen. So,
I might have the order wrong here, but I'm trying.
Thank you. Hi, Lori. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you as well.
So let me just make some quick introductions as we're still sort of getting things set up to start the panel. And this one we're going to do in a more interactive format. I'm going to ask some questions, and then we're also going to have an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. So be thinking of those. But we're delighted with the participation we have here. We have several agencies from the U.S. government represented here. First next to me is Susan Kurland. She's the Assistant Secretary for Aviation and International Affairs with the Department of Transportation. Previously, she's been in government for a while, but she was previously also Managing Director at Jeffries & Company in the area of airport infrastructure and municipal finance. So someone who has a background that will relate to the aviation agreement, which is one of the things we'd love to have a discussion about. Next on the line, Jose Raul Perales. He's the Assistant Secretary for the Private Sector at the Department of Homeland Security. Was most recently also he's new to this position actually, and was most recently also at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But before that, and I'm very happy to have you here because you were also a colleague of mine here at the Wilson Center previously in our Latin America program. So great to have you back, Jose Raul. Thanks for coming. Next on the line, Lori Faith. She serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs at the Department of the Interior. And she comes from Arizona, so it says, or worked in Arizona for Governor Napolitano, who's now working on U.S. Mexico relations in her new capacity in California as well with the UC system, but worked there for a long time in the border region on policy issues such as forest health, climate change, water management, has a great background to be tackling some of these issues. Thank you for being here today. And last but certainly not least, Adam Szyminski, who's the administrator for the U.S. Energy Information Administration of the Department of Energy. He served as Senior Director for Energy and the Environment on the staff of the National Security Council previously, and also as Chief Energy Economist for Deutsche Bank, among many other qualifications. Thank you all for being here very much today. And we're just going to jump right into some questions, hopefully provide you some opportunities to talk about the areas of the U.S. Mexico high-level economic dialogue that you're most involved in. And I'm going to start just right to my left or right with Susan Kurland. You know, one of the things that we've been discussing is just the volume of commerce between the United States and Mexico, and 80% of that goes by across the land border, but we also know that some of it goes by plane. It comes in many ways, but the Department of Transportation is one of the agencies that's in charge of making sure that the infrastructure is there, the circulatory framework is there, so that all this can move back and forth. Because if not, that really can be, if we have bottlenecks in that transportation infrastructure, It can just be one of the major, so I think the term that was used earlier is sand in the gears of the North American economy, or it can just be a drain on the competitiveness of the companies that are really making things between the United States and Mexico. I understand you were just in Mexico last week, so I thought maybe you could start by telling us, what is it that you were doing in Mexico, and what is it that your department is doing to make sure that things move in a free way so that we can have the most competitive processes possible in the area, in the region.
Well, thank you, Chris, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Last week I was in Mexico working to continue the fostering of our relationship with our Mexican colleagues in promotion of the HLED. And as was said in the breakfast this morning and again at the in today's session, that we, the HLED is this overarching framework, and we're all working very, very devotedly on pragmatic solutions to some of the problems and some of the opportunities that we have. And I think my colleagues and I sitting up here today at our agencies, our roles are to work with our Mexican colleagues and with our companies to come up with those creative solutions and those pragmatic solutions. And one of the areas in which we were talking about is, in fact, the new aviation agreement that we work very closely with our colleagues from the State Department, our colleagues from the Commerce Department, with our industry. We make sure, one of the things about when we negotiate aviation agreements, we make sure our industry is with us. And our Mexican colleagues were very strong on getting the agreement over the finish line. And so, as soon as the two countries complete their internal processes, we are anticipating, we hope that the agreement will be in force in January of 2016. The Mexicans still have to take the agreement to their Senate, and then both countries have some internal processes that they have to complete to get it over the finish line. But we're looking forward to it. I don't think we can understate the importance of the agreement to commerce, to our travelers, to our companies, and to our two countries. So we're very excited about that. In terms of the second part of the question, and that I think goes more to the cross-border conversation, and what Antonia was mentioning in terms of the strategic logistical corridors. At DOT, we work very closly on the transportation aspects of it, and I know Jose will be talking about the TSA. CBP notions of that, but one thing that everybody should recognize is that we do take a whole of government approach, and that is something that both Stefan and Kathy alluded to in their remarks, that it's a very coordinated USG approach to these issues. And hearing from you all where you're seeing the sand in the gears, or where you're seeing the opportunities for us to coordinate better, will be really key. And I can talk more about what we're doing on the transportation side, but now or later in the
we can keep going around and have a chance to come back and have more conversation. Thank you very much. Jose Raul, working at DHS, one of the things that I've looked at a lot actually is, the border is obviously the focal point here, and this is probably one of the most important issues to be tackled in terms of North American competitiveness and U.S. Mexico competitiveness, is making sure that our border, it works as a motor rather than a brake on the trade and the movement of people back and forth across the border on a day-to-day basis. They have a local economy that's hugely important to both of our countries, and is the point of transaction, or a very important point of transaction in the national trade between our two countries. One of the things there are trusted traveler and trusted trader programs. These are programs that by working with the government, undergoing a background check, you get expedited passage across the border. Very important to industry, very important to individuals who live in the area, and perhaps one of the underexploited tools of the 21st century border. Being exploited, I think there are some advances being made, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what's going on in that sphere.
Certainly, Chris, and first of all, thank you to you and the Wilson Center for putting together this event. It feels wonderful. It's like a homecoming, of course, and I've been here as a speaker since I worked at this noble institution a few years ago. And I also want to thank my colleagues, because it really this question actually touches or hinges upon this very same concept that Susan was talking about, an all-of-government effort. Many of the things that we do in terms of advancing the relationship, and it's a relationship that matters to the U.S. in a way that few other relationships in the world matter, for many reasons that have to do from foreign affairs to the affairs of our local communities in the country. And so it is a relationship that that we take in a holistic approach and in a way that makes us work in partnership in ways that no other does. And on Trusted Traveler, you're absolutely right. It is one of the ways in which we are tackling the issue of modernizing the border and of making sure that there is an easier flow of goods and services across the border. It's part of an effort to keep a balance between more efficient and more trade, but also keep us secure. And this is part of the angle of the conversation that some of us, it's kind of a bit hard to address, considering that for a very long time the relationship between the United States and Mexico along the border emphasized extremely the aspect of security to the detriment, I would say, of this facility of movement that is so important for our North American platform. And I think that some of the advances that we've been making on areas such as trusted travelers and trusted traders are areas where we can demonstrate that we can achieve a healthy balance between these two areas. And just going to go through some of the highlights of what we've been doing in this regard, because I think, as you point out, it's a story that deserves to be told and deserves to be emphasized and spread out among our colleagues, and certainly with the support of the business community, which has been an incredible partner in moving this forward. Some of you may know this, but in October of 2014, there was a signing of the mutual recognition arrangement between our two trusted trader programs, CBP's Customs Trade Partnership Agreement, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, the CTPAT. I usually talk about the acronym and not so much about what it means. And the NEC, which is Mexico's new scheme for certified companies, or Nuevo Esquema de Empresas Certificadas. And of course, mutual recognition. These programs. Essentially, what they do is link them together to create a unified and sustainable security poster that can assist in security and facilitating global trade. And of course, we have a timeline for implementation. Be happy to share that information with anybody in the audience to know we have a specific set of metrics that will get us to the full implementation of the agreement. On Trusted Traveler, since 2010, over 50,000 Mexicans have enrolled in Global Entry, which is the United States Trusted Traveler program. And since the launch of Viajero Confiable, which is a Mexican program that was launched in 2013, Mexican immigration has enrolled over 880 members into the program, including 187 U.S. citizens. So, as part of the 21st Century Border Management Initiative, CBP and Mexican Immigration are working to promote enrollment on both Global Entry and Viajero Confiable through joint outreach events and other engagements. We also have data on Sentry information and also how this connects with FAST, which is the agreement that we have with Canada. And so, again, our goal being that we want to create a North American Trusted Traveler initiative, as some of my colleagues have been saying, and we discussed this earlier in the breakfast. Conversations that we're having with our partners, with Mexico, for instance, and the conversations that Mexico and Canada are having in this regard, putting all of these pieces together are fundamental for truly empowering a North American platform, which is a direction that DHS wants to take with our Trusted Traveler programs and this vision of security and trade at the border. So at the North American Leaders Summit, commitments were made on precisely on the North American Trusted Traveler arrangement. So we are working with Mexico and Canada in this regard, and we're taking a trilateral approach to Trusted Trader. Again, part of a partnership that exists between CTPAC and NEC, and of course CTPAT and Canada's Partners in Protection program, which is also developing.
Thanks very much, Jose Rojo. Turn now to Lori. Thanks again for being here. There's an energy revolution underway throughout North America. There's huge changes in terms of levels of production. That's one of the reasons why we've seen this fall in energy prices recently. It has to do with the exploitation of shale gas and oil resources in the U.S. It has to do with, or increasingly will have to do with, Mexico's energy reform that was recently passed. And so I think, this has also opened up a new opportunity for bilateral conversations, really Mexico's energy reform and the changes happening here. One of the areas that people are talking a lot about has to do with regulation. How do we make sure that as we're exploiting all of these resources in both countries and sometimes in transboundary areas, that we're doing so in a safe way, in a sustainable way? And so I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the bilateral efforts that are underway in that field.
Sure, I would be happy to. And just want to say thank you for inviting me to be here. It's a real honor. And we're really excited that energy is now a part of the high-level economic dialogue. We think it's a really great fit. And just for a really brief background on Department of the Interior, we have jurisdiction in the United States for exploitation of offshore resources in the Outer Continental Shelf. So, and also for development of any energy resources on federal land. So we're a really critical partner in all of this. And we've actually been engaging with Mexico on a lot of cooperation and information exchange for a number of years, primarily around the energy thing through the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We're very excited about the reforms that Mexico's put into place and continues to, follow up with regulations and rules. And with that in mind, we're committed to furthering our engagement with them. We strongly encourage technical exchange, ongoing technical exchange, I would say, to develop a compatible set of standards, a rigorous system of regulatory oversight, and operator adherence to effective safety culture, alongside with protocols to cooperate on containment and response strategies. I think Deepwater Horizon taught the entire world lasting lessons about the importance of being well prepared for response, and containment is one of the things that we all learned is really, really important, and Mexico's a very good partner in that regard. So should we ever have another spill, we'll be all set for that. They have stood up a new agency that would be really a direct counterpart to BSEE, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. And so we look forward to collaborating with them for a regular exchange of information as they go forward with staffing it up and putting into place all of their rules and regulations.
Thank you very much. And to continue on the topic of energy with Adam, we're specifically with, I know because of your background, you'll be familiar with the broader set of issues as well, but specifically thinking about the energy information side of things, one of, the EIA has for years put out great data on not just what's happening domestically in terms of energy production, but also even internationally. Mexico has undergone a lot of efforts recently to improve their mapping of energy resources, make that information available now to companies who might be bidding on projects in the very near-term future. So I think there's some collaboration going on in that area, and I wonder if you could talk to us about some of the cooperation on the information side of things and mapping specifically.
Sure, Chris, I'd love to do that. Thank you. It's interesting, and the dialogue has been taking place here. A lot of the cross-border trade that's been talked about is the trucks going across the border and opening up the airways to better movement of goods by plane. There's also a lot of connections, a huge connection between Mexico and the United States that you don't actually see this stuff going across the border. It's underground pipelines, oil and gas, and the wires, electricity, going actually back and forth between both the countries. And a lot of it. There are two things that are happening at the Department of Energy related to this. First, the Quadrennial Energy Review, which is underway and should be out at the end of this month. The Department of Energy is working with the Secretariat of Energy in Mexico to kind of do a parallel infrastructure assessment to look at electricity and oil and gas pipeline border crossings and ways to improve the flow of energy back and forth across the border. What the Energy Information Administration is doing along these same lines, as you indicated, is trying to work on a set of issues associated with the data and mapping. I got asked at one point why EIA's great energy infrastructure maps for the U.S. stop at the border with Mexico and Canada, and the answer is we don't have all of the data to be able to do in Mexico and Canada what we have done for the United States. That's going to change. There was a memorandum of understanding signed by the Secretary Joaquin of of Mexico, Minister Rickford of Canada, and Energy Secretary Muniz here to build out the energy infrastructure mapping capability so that it'll go across the border and we can do all of North America. In addition to that, we're going to try to reconcile the cross-border energy data flows. It turns out that the data on what we think we export to Mexico and what Mexico thinks they import from us as far as oil, gas, and electricity is concerned don't exactly line up. There are timing differences, there are terminology differences. We're going to sort that out. In addition to that, we have a third and final part of this program that we think we'll have done this year that will actually look at the different projections for energy out into the near future and try to find ways not to come up with a joint projection or outlook, but rather to at least find a way to legitimately compare the outlooks of all three countries. I think that this is going to lead to a tremendous improvement in everybody's understanding of what's going on in the energy area.
Thanks very much. Maybe we can just keep going around with some questions for a moment here. So Assistant Secretary Kurland, could you get into maybe some more detail about what's happening in terms of the designing? I think there's actually a North American project underway as well in terms of a transportation plan. But how is it that it's not just the border. It is the border, but it's not just the border. It's also the connections that run out from there. We can't just fix a bottleneck at the border only to move it 20 miles up the road to a new intersection or where some of the highways are. So how is it that the planning is taking place or we can make improvements to the planning process so that we're building the infrastructure that we need really for tomorrow or 10 years out, because that's how long these projects take to get on the ground and get ready to go?
Well, thank you, Chris. That's an excellent question. And I would like to make a few points about that. We have, with our Mexican colleagues, the Joint Working Committee on Transportation Planning, or as we call it, the JWC. And the JWC includes all of the relevant agencies and departments from the U.S., my colleagues at DHS and their agencies, which are part of DHS, the agencies that are part of the Department of Transportation, the State Department. We work very closely. They are part of the JWC. Our colleagues from Mexico are part of the JWC. And importantly, our states work and are part of the JWC. The way we are in the United States is that while a lot of funding may come from the U.S. government, the planning and a lot of the decision-making as to what infrastructure actually gets built is done at the state. So it's critical that the states are part of this process. And we've got a couple of initiatives that are ongoing. One is we have 6 regional master planning projects ongoing, and these some of them have been completed and others are getting close to completion. We also, each one of our states is developing or has its own state freight plan. And as many of you here know, the United States is engaged, the Department of Transportation is engaged in creating a national strategic freight plan. So what these states are doing will be very important to what we're doing from the federal perspective. And we've also, within the JWC, established a freight committee to be sure that the states are having a role in our bilateral coordination. And I want to give you, a couple of examples of some of the projects that have been completed or are ongoing. One is, I mentioned the master plans. Two is we've got 9 pilot programs for border crossing wait time studies ongoing. And we have new recommendations regarding measures to improve border flow. Another initiative that I'd like to mention to you is that the Department of Transportation is funding a trilateral freight study that is going to take a look at freight flows over the next 30 years, going from Mexico through the United States up through Canada. And this is an area which we really would like very much to have the private sector, the Wilson Center, be engaged with us on is we are holding workshops in all 3 countries, and we're going to be holding our next workshop in Mexico on March 25th. And the Mexican government is participating with us, SET. They're going to get some of their Mexican companies to be engaged, and we invite you and urge you as well, if anybody at the end of the session will contact me or come up to me or Fred Eberhard, who was here. We'd be delighted to get involved with you on that. But so these are just some of the things that we're doing. I can give you a list of others, but it is critical that we have all the right players in the room. We understand what the statutory sometimes roadblocks might be, and then have the political will to change them or to figure out creative ways so that we're doing projects that make sense on both sides of the border.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jose Raul, to go back to you, thinking about, not just the sort of the physical infrastructure and the projects to get people back and forth across the border, but it's also on the commercial side extremely important, the customs processes. And it's not just customs because there are so many agencies, actually, again, there are so many agencies involved in the export-import process. There was an executive order recently, about a year ago now announced, that came from President Obama, to finish the creation of a single window, a single platform where electronically documents can be submitted that will go out to all the relevant agencies. How's that going? How are we going to get there? What does that mean for us in terms of competitiveness in North America?
What a question. Actually, this is where this dovetails pretty nicely with what Susan is doing, right? I mean, this is call it the software of our efforts to have a more streamlined freight movement between the United States and Mexico. And it's a fascinating question. It's one of the biggest, to be frank, one of the biggest projects that the Department of Homeland Security is undertaking, and the Deputy Secretary is assuming a leading role in this, as you can imagine. And for most of you in the private sector, you know that in the movement of cargo products between the United States and Mexico, there can be as many as 47 U.S. agencies involved in the process, right? And so that can create a tremendous amount of hurdles and complications for businesses, especially for small and medium-sized businesses that want to get into supply chains or want to explore exporting for the first time, or even sustain their export levels. And frankly, the amount of and sometimes the disparity of the data that is required for completion of all the requirements to cross to move products through the border can be daunting. And so there has been a movement in various parts of the world, in various countries. Mexico has actually taken a strong lead in pursuing a single window. For those of you who don't know what the single window is, and allow me for a second to get to come out of the technical or go between the technical and the less technical. Basically, and to your point about the executive order, basically it is the executive order requires the completion and government-wide utilization of something that we call the International Trade Data System, and that's the primary means of receiving data from users of the system by December 31st of 2016. When this is fully implemented, and we really are, to answer your question very quickly, we are on target, and we are going to meet that December deadline. Actually, we are. I can provide data for those of you who are interested on how advanced we are in some areas. We're making tremendous progress in this. When it is fully implemented, the ITDS, which is being deployed as part of CBP's Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE, for some of you who may have been using this, will be, and quote-unquote, a single window through which businesses will transmit data required by the government for the exportation or importation of cargo. And the idea is that this electronic system will significantly reduce the reliance on paper forms and manual processes and speed border commerce. Now, again, part of the idea here isn't just to automate, to take all of the requirements that exist now and turn them into a digital platform that companies will use whenever they are about to submit their documentation. But actually, we're taking a really hard look at what data duplicities exist in the requirements among various agencies to make sure that this actually is a streamlined process and that it isn't just digitalizing, but actually rethinking and reimagining how can we make the border crossing a lot more efficient. So, and as I said, we have this is a strong priority for the department. The Deputy Secretary is strongly involved. And so just to give you an idea, and I'm going to get into some dates, which for those of you, if you come out of it with anything from this question, I want you to remember a set of dates. First of all, over half of the ITDS technical capabilities have been successfully deployed. So we are, as I said, really on schedule to making this deadline. There are 3 dates that I want you to remember. For May 1st, 2015, we will have use of ACE for all electronic manifest filings in all modes of transportation. For November 1st of 2015, we expect the use of ACE on all electronic cargo release and related entry summary filings, including data required by partner government agencies. With only a few exceptions, paper forms will not be accepted as part of an otherwise electronic cargo release and entry summary filing. And then the third date, as we move towards that December deadline, is October 1st of 2016, which is our target for the use of ACE for all remaining electronic portions of the CBP cargo process, including for process and liquidation of data. Of course, none of this can be done without the expertise and the input from the private sector, so there is a very vigorous and active dialogue with the private sector going on from within CBP. Actually, we're getting ready to start the pilots for the single window. We are encouraging filers to participate in some of the various ongoing and planned ITDS, not just one pilot, but the various pilots that we have in the pipeline. And of course, we'll also be doing outreach to kind of cover not just the mechanics of the single window, but actually the strategic vision. As I said, the question lingers, are we on time? Are we on deadline? We want to have a frank dialogue and a fluid conversation to let the business community know that we're actually where we are at each step of the way and get input from the business community about what we can be doing better and more efficiently. And one last item that I wanted to highlight, and especially in the context of our colleagues in Mexico, one of the things that we are conceiving in terms of the single window is that because this is such a fundamental tool, not just for U.S. traders, but because of a point that my colleague Dave Nelson at GE made during our breakfast, which is that we don't make products in the United States and send to Mexico, or you make products in Mexico and send to the U.S. We make things together, which means that to the extent that we're developing a single window, this cannot be a single window that is not in conversation with other single windows in the continent. So one of the things that we're doing very strongly, and I was very lucky to participate in a meeting of this network in December of last year. My previous life at the U.S. Chamber, I accompanied the development of that network from the private sector, was that the United States is really engaged in working in the single windows network of the Americas. Again, our goal is that once the single window is fully operational and we get to some of our targets, that we engage with our trading partners, and that at some point in the development, we have something that we call interoperability, basically that our window is conversant with a window in Mexico and vice versa.
Thanks very much, Jose Raul. So I think I have more questions for all of you, but I think we have about 10 minutes left. I'd love to open it up to some audience questions, and maybe I'll be able to sneak some of mine in as we go through some of the audience questions as well. But let's take it out to the audience, and we have a couple of opportunities. I think Duncan, let's give your hand up in the front, who's the director of the Mexico Institute, and maybe we can grab one or two other questions in the session as well.
Yeah. My question.
Bring out a microphone, yeah.
Thanks very much. Excellent panel. My question is about the energy dimension of the high-level economic dialogue. It's energy and climate change. And what are the steps that can be taken by the two countries working together to really improve the joint approach to climate change? I know there's been mention of promoting renewable energy, about reducing emissions, etc. But sort of when the rubber hits the road, what is it exactly that we're doing there on the bilateral agenda?
Thanks. Maybe we can grab one or two other questions from the audience as well. We have one in the back there, Damien, last row.
Yeah, Jeff Price, Johnson. One of the things that was mentioned in an earlier panel was outreach to Central America,
Can you flip the microphone on? I think it's off, actually. She can help you out.
Hi. One issue that was raised earlier was Central America and the integration of Central America into some of these infrastructure networks, particularly in energy. And as one of the panelists could talk about the prospects for possibly integrating Central America in the future into some of these endeavors, and I'm thinking particularly of the energy infrastructure.
Thanks very much. And we could take one more question if there's someone else. Well, let's go back to the panel right now, and we'll perhaps have a chance for another round as well then. And this is perfect because it gives some opportunities for the two of you to speak a little bit more about some of the energy issues, and then we can see if other panelists have comments they'd like to make as well.
I'll take a stab at Duncan's question regarding energy and climate change. And so to date, through the Department of the Interior, we've mostly focused on the regulatory and cooperation in that area. But I would think that one area that would be a really good place for, again, mostly sharing expertise and talking about it is adaptation to the impacts of climate change. So while a great focus on the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions is really critical, and as the United States government, as a government as a whole, the administration is really focusing on what we can do government-wide to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated just with the basic functions of government. I think we would have a lot to share in that regard. But we've also put a great emphasis on adaptation, and so a whole host of things about looking at invasive species and how does that impact it. How do we start planning better for our protected areas for the future? How's that going to impact carbon sequestration? So some of those types of things. But I think that's an area that, at least from my perspective, I haven't been that engaged in, and we need to flesh out.
Secretary Joaquin Caldwell was here in December as part of this trilateral initiative on data. There was actually a pretty healthy discussion of what could be done in climate change. There have been steps taken in Mexico, and maybe Antonio would like to comment on that. But there are initiatives underway there. There's climate and environment initiatives underway in the U.S. Regarding the dialogue being led by USAID and others. The Renewable Energy Lab at the Department of Energy is involved in a number of these initiatives as well. EIA doesn't do policy, but we have been looking at the very strong relationship between energy use and carbon dioxide emissions from energy uses, and we're tracking that not only in the U.S. but globally as well.
Thanks. Either of you want to respond?
Just one thing to say regarding the question of Central America, and thank you for the question. It's actually a very, very pertinent one. A couple of things. My colleague Alan Burson and I we talk a lot about this, and we share a belief, and he has been extremely emphatic about this point, that he strongly believes that what we have been able to do in terms of the collaborative regulatory work that we've done with Mexico and some of the initiatives that we've been able to do in the border with Mexico that have had a transformative effect on the way that we do business on both sides of the border are some things that we could actually do or that we want to do in Central America. I mean, his vision is that this idea of the North American platform, because of the way in which Central American economies are integrated to the U.S. economy, in a different measure, in a different way than Mexico, but certainly following along the same path, if you wish, of an earlier development in that regard. Which means that development will have an effect on Central America, and we want to make sure that we tackle that to the best extent possible. So, for example, we are doing a variety of initiatives. For example, even on the single window, we have a free trade agreement with Central America, for example. So there is a lot of concern and preoccupation among the customs authorities in Central America about what is happening with the single window and what will that mean for Central American exporters that don't have the same types of programs in place or the same types of activities in place that Mexico has developed. So what we're doing is making sure that in these conversations that we have with Mexico, and in the Central America strategy that Vice President Biden launched, and that he was just in Guatemala with his colleagues in Central America and the U.S. government, that the experience of our conversation with Mexico informs what we're doing with the region and back and forth. So what I could say is stay tuned, and this is also an area where the feedback from the private sector is fundamental, because the private sector does activities in the region on the ground every day that can really help inform us on the way that we do our things and the way we think about what is possible with Central America. Not too long ago, I was leading a network of American Chambers of Commerce in the Western Hemisphere, and frankly, it gave me a tremendous vision of the kinds of developments that U.S. companies are doing with counterparts in Central America that are based on their experiences with Mexico. So we want to foster that dialogue and integrate it as much as possible to our work with the region.
And I'll just, if I might, just expand on that a little bit in regard to energy through primarily State Department funding in this regard for various energy programs. The Department of the Interior, through our International Technical Assistance Program, is working with some countries in Central America on sharing, again, best practices and our regulatory framework in regard to safe energy development. So, I think we're building a nice groundwork there.
I can actually give you a specific example of how Central America could end up benefiting, along with Mexico and the United States, from cross-border energy flows. There is a lot more natural gas moving from Texas into Mexico. That means that in the northern part of Mexico, that electricity can be generated from that natural gas. That means the electricity being generated further south in Mexico can actually be sent towards southern Mexico and actually into Central America. And I wonder what that is. Right, nuclear cooperation will also be on the list. So in any event, the ability to move energy back and forth across the border between the United States and Mexico will also benefit the countries of Central America. Final comment, real quick one. Although it's not Central America, there is a great deal of interest on the part of Colombia and Chile to participate in this data initiative that Mexico and Canada have underway. And once we get it ironed out with Canada and Mexico, we'll see what we can do about expanding it.
Someone's telling us it's time to end this session, so I think we'll just go ahead and do that. But sometimes the initiatives of the high-level economic dialogue can feel like a laundry list of projects, and I think that just speaks to, some people, we talk about, a new NAFTA or something. That's not what's happening next. What's happening next is all of this. And it's a ton of work that's being done. It's a ton of important projects. But this truly is, if there were such thing as a next NAFTA, it would have to take into account all of these detailed issues that are left. Because now that we have this massive flow of commerce between our countries, there's a lot of detailed work that needs to be done, a lot of specific issues that need to be resolved. And it's great to see such a laundry list of things being accomplished. So thanks for sharing the details. Thanks to all of you for being here today.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Jose, we should get some.
Would love to. Absolutely.
Let me give you my card.
I would love to.
Yeah, I love Alan.
As you were saying some things, I was taking furious notes because it reminded me, so many things to talk about.